Parliament's Portfolio Committee on Land Reform plans to conduct an oversight visit to the Ingonyama Trust Board in an attempt to resolve the fiduciary challenges faced by the entity. A standoff between Minister Mzwanele Nyhontso and AmaZulu King Misuzulu kaZwelithini has been escalating over the Ingonyama Trust. Earlier, the monarch suspended board members. Now, Parliament's Portfolio Committee on Land Reform is planning an oversight visit to the Trust Board, it says, to resolve what it calls fiduciary challenges. The committee also plans to hold a meeting with the King, who is the sole trustee of the Ingonyama Trust. Newzroom Afrika's Ziyanda Ngcobo takes a look at the history of the legislation that guides how this land is meant to be managed.
The Ingonyama Trust Act of 1994 has always been a contentious issue that has continuously seen standoffs between the late and current Zulu monarch on one side and the government of the day on the other. The piece of legislation had its roots in a threat on the eve of South Africa's first democratic elections by the then president of the IFP, Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi. He threatened to pull out of the historic polls unless there was a recognition of AmaZulu King kaZwelithini Zulu in the new constitutional dispensation. That situation heralded the birth of the Ingonyama Trust, which is meant to administer land on behalf of the Zulu nation.
The Inkatha Freedom Party's Central Committee decided at a meeting on Sunday, the 17th of April, to contest the elections at the national and provincial levels if amendments to the Constitution could be made to secure the Kingdom of KwaZulu and the future of His Majesty the King of the Zulus as a constitutional monarch. The decision of the Central Committee was further made conditional upon the final formulations for provisions for the existence of the Zulu Kingdom and the role of His Majesty being agreed to through mediation.
But as the years went by, the government had questions about how the Zulu nation and occupants of the nearly 3 million hectares of land benefited from this act, which falls outside the bounds of state reform. In 2018, a high-level panel report led by former President Kgalema Motlanthe found that the trust was failing to account for the rent collected from residents who leased the land.
They were forced to sign these leases with the Ingonyama Trust, which provided that they must pay annual rents, that the rents would go up 10% a year, and that if they failed to pay the rent, they would be evicted. So, the panel investigated this and saw that people were being forced to take out these leases under duress, that actually they were told that if they didn't sign these leases, they would be evicted. And clearly that was unconstitutional and in breach of the Act itself.
Claassen says that the trust has refused to be accountable to Parliament, and this is as a result of a deliberate repurposing of the Ingonyama Trust to benefit a few.
These are all problems that actually stem not from the wording of the Act, which provided that the Ingonyama would hold that land in trust like the minister holds that land in trust in other homeland areas. But that has been reconceptualized very successfully by, I would say, the former Minister Buthelezi into saying the king owns the land, and the settlement was that the king owns the land. And that has had a massive ideological impact and has completely confused people into thinking the king owns the land, the king has sole power over the land.
Over the years, the relationship between the Zulu kings and the then governing ANC would be carefully managed for apparent political expediency. But now, for the first time in 30 years, the Land Reform Minister is not from the former liberation movement and is a member of a government of national unity. Mzwanele Nyhontso has come out against the current king, Misuzulu. He says members of the Ingonyama Trust Board were unlawfully suspended, and he is calling for more accountability when it comes to the financial standing of the entity.
The responsibility to appoint board members dissolve the board or remove some board members, that responsibility rests with the minister. It can't be about the king. Remember, the king is also the chairperson of the board.
In 2019, a ruling was handed down against the trust. The court found it had forced communities to take leases and pay rent for land which had been occupied by families for generations. The judgment ordered that the monies collected by the trust be repaid to those forced to unlawfully take rental agreements. Parliament is yet to ensure that this happens. For Newzroom Afrika on Channel 405, I'm Ziyanda Ngcobo in Johannesburg.